Your wife, Virginia.
A month later, a second telegram arrived. John Soden would not be coming home to Waterbury. The shell that had exploded in the makeshift hospital had killed him. Virginia's younger brother would always remember that after she read the telegram, his sister let out an unearthly howl.
War is mostly boredom, telling lies, stealing from some other outfit if they've got something better to eat than you have, and just making the best of 1,000 of bad situations. It's going to rain, you're going to get wet, it's going to get too hot, it's going to get too cold. I mean, you're always uncomfortable in the service, it seemed like to me.
By the spring of 1944, Sid Phillips of Mobile had been stationed in the Pacific for more than 2 years. He had survived the fighting on Guadalcanal and at Cape Gloucester, and hoped to be sent to Australia with its plentiful beer and friendly girls, until he got his orders to go home. Instead, his 1st Marine Division was sent to Pavuvu, a remote island so small that when the men drilled, one outfit had to march clockwise and the next counterclockwise to keep from blocking the only road. Sitting on his cot one hot afternoon, Phillips was surprised to see a familiar figure, his best friend from Mobile, Eugene Sledge.
I saw him coming down the company street looking intense. I recognized him and ran out, screamed his name. And we ran and beat on each other and embraced and rolled around on the ground. People thought we were fighting and a big crowd gathered. But then I introduced him around, and it was just a great day.
20-year-old Eugene B. Sledge was the grandson of Confederate officers. Bookish and frail as a child, he had been taught to fish and hunt by his physician father, and was a freshman at the Marion Military Institute, studying to become an officer, when he decided to sign on as a private in the Marines instead. He told his anxious parents that if he waited for graduation, he might not get a chance at combat.
Eugene Sledge was just an ordinary young man. He was full of pranks and full of tricks, and he and my brother Sidney pulled every one of them that they possibly could. But they were such great friends that what one did, the other one followed suit. He was a very gentle man, as my brother Sidney was, to be thrown into the middle of a fight like that.
Not long after Sledge got to the Pacific, he began keeping an unauthorized journal, slipping tiny sheets of notes between the pages of the small New Testament he carried, so that no one else would know what he was doing. Years later, those uncensored notes would form the basis of a harrowing memoir of his experiences in the Pacific.
The awesome reality that we were training to be cannon fodder in a global war that had already snuffed out millions of lives never seemed to occur to us. The fact that our own lives might end violently, or that we might be crippled while we were still boys, didn't seem to register. The only thing that we seemed to be truly concerned about was that we might be too afraid to do our jobs under fire. An apprehension nagged at each of us that he might appear to be yellow if he were afraid. Eugene Sledge.
He had come in as a replacement, and I was being rotated home because I'd been overseas over 2 years. I said I did think about what he was facing, because it was all bad. Every campaign was bad. Some were a little quicker and a little worse than others. Some were under worse conditions than others, but they were all bad. And I knew he was going to face some hard times.
In late August of 1944, Sledge and 16,458 other men of the 1st Marine Division left Pavuvu for the Palau Islands, more than 2,000 miles away. The Marines were headed for the tiny island of Peleliu, where the Japanese had constructed an airfield. It was only 550 miles east of Mindanao, which was to be the first stop in General Douglas MacArthur's campaign to recapture the Philippines. MacArthur wanted Peleliu put out of action to protect his flank. But as Eugene Sledge and his fellow Marines steamed toward their target, playing poker and sunbathing on the deck to fill the time, Allied plans changed. After the decisive American victory in the Battle of the Philippine Sea the previous June, Admiral William Halsey no longer considered the Japanese Air Force a serious threat. The Peleliu airfield had become largely irrelevant. But no one canceled the invasion of the island. Halsey was sure it would take only 4 days to secure it. For 3 days, the Navy bombarded Peleliu. The foliage that blanketed its jagged coral hills was burned away. The coral itself was bleached white by phosphorus. Finally, the officer in charge told his superiors, "We have run out of targets." It was time to send in the Marines.
It was hard to sleep that night before the invasion. I thought of home, my parents, my friends, and whether I would do my duty, be wounded or disabled, or be killed. I concluded that it was impossible for me to be killed because God loved me. And then I told myself that God loved us all and that many would die, or be ruined physically or mentally, or both in the days following. My heart pounded and I broke out in cold sweat. Finally, I called myself a damn coward and eventually fell asleep saying the Lord's Prayer to myself.
The invasion of Peleliu began at dawn on September 15, 1944. At 6:30 in the morning, Sledge and his comrades clambered into their Amtraks and started for the island.
The world was a nightmare of flashes, violent explosions, snapping bullets. Up and down the beach, a number of Amtraks were burning. Japanese machine gun bursts made long splashes on the water as though flaying it with some giant whip.
Three Marine regiments, more than 5,000 men, went ashore side by side and quickly discovered that the bombardment had done little damage to the carefully prepared warren of 500 fortified caves and concealed gun emplacements, some equipped with sliding doors of armored steel that honeycombed the coral ridges running up the center of the island. The Japanese poured fire down upon Eugene Sledge and his fellow Marines.
I turned my face away and wished that I were imagining it all. I had tasted the bitterest essence of war, the sight of helpless comrades being slaughtered, and it filled me with disgust.
Willie Rushton, also from Mobile, was on the beach too, now a member of the 11th Depot Company.
And then the first day we went in there, those people, they slaughtered us Marines like we were just a bunch of hogs coming in the slaughter pen. Japanese were some tough customers. They really could fight, and they come at you with everything they had. So we Marines, we were just tougher and tougher than they were. So we always almost came out on top.
The Americans lost 1,200 men, but they clung to the beach, and some began fighting their way inland. Eugene Sledge was a mortarman. He fired round after round into the enemy, while riflemen advanced ahead of him. He and his regiment managed to make it all the way across the narrow island, then dug in for the night. No one slept, for fear that Japanese infiltrators would slip into their lines and slit their throats.
It was the darkest night I ever saw. The overcast sky was as black as the dripping mangroves that walled us in. I had the sensation of being in a great black hole and reaching out to touch the sides of the gun pit to orient myself. Slowly, the reality of it all formed in my mind. We were expendable. It was difficult to accept. We come from a nation and a culture that values life and the individual. To find oneself in a situation where your life seems of little value is the ultimate in loneliness.
The next morning, the Marines were ordered to assault Japanese positions in the cliffs that overlooked the airfield. Tanks and artillery would go first. Then the infantry and Sledge would follow, charging across the exposed gravel airstrip to attack the high ground. The temperature neared 100 degrees. There was no shade. The only water available, hauled up from the beach in 5-gallon cans, turned out to be fouled by diesel oil. Scores of men collapsed from heat exhaustion before the signal was given. As the Marines, 4 battalions and 1,800 men, moved forward, the enemy opened up with everything they had.
I clenched my teeth, squeezed my carbine stock, recited over and over to myself, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." The further we went, the worse it got. It seemed impossible that any of us would make it across. To be shelled by massed artillery and mortars is absolutely terrifying. But to be shelled in the open is terror compounded.
Sledge somehow made it across the airstrip safely and took what shelter he could beneath a bush. He was shaking like a leaf, he wrote, but took comfort